Welcome back to Feathers and Field Goals. It's been a while since we recorded. We talked about the bowl game. We had a fantastic football season. We've been a little away, and we apologize for that, but we've been working a lot behind the scenes to get ready for the future of Feathers and Field Goals. And we're in our new recording studio. We're excited to be here. Dan, it feels good to be recording with you again. We have Brody in the background controlling us as perfect as they always do. And we're excited to now have, for the first time, not the first time on the podcast, but the first time with the official title of full-time Director of Athletics, Jordan Skolnick. Super excited for you to join us to talk about the Delaware Blue Hens, specifically this time of year. We're in March. It's time to talk about the basketball season. So thanks so much, Jordan, for joining us this afternoon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it, and excited for your new studio, and appreciate all you guys' coverage. It means a lot to us. So looking forward to talking today.
I guess John Rothstein, one of my favorite basketball reporters in the game, he always talks about, he has this saying, we sleep in May, or we're thinking about March right now. I was telling someone the other day, I can't wait for the Blue Hens to get back in March for the men's or women's programs, because it just changes a lot. It's my favorite time of year as a neutral sports fan, but it feels a lot different when Delaware's outside of it. So let's just talk about the basketball seasons from this year as a whole. First year in Conference USA, a new era. The men's side missed the tournament, went through a lot this season. The women's side as well got a tournament win in the first round and fell in the quarterfinals. So just a high level. What are your thoughts on the Delaware basketball season as a whole?
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about basketball because this is such a important. Both our men's and women's programs are such important programs for us, and I believe so strongly in our ability and how we're set up to have success and win championships in both these programs. And we fell short of that this year, and so it was disappointing on both sides. The results weren't what we expected, and we have high expectations of what we expect here at Delaware. And so we're not going to shy away from that. And Martin and Sarah will also tell you the same thing. And so, we believe that we can win championships here, and we're resourced to do that. I believe we have the right coaches to do that. I believe we have the right infrastructure to do that. And so now we have to figure out, what changes we're going to make in the offseason here to put ourselves in a position to be able to go into next year with not only the optimism and the excitement and the enthusiasm for that, but then we've got to execute on it. And I think, when I look at the big picture this year, and I'll start with the men's side of things, I think I came away from it feeling as disappointed as it was in the results. There were stretches this year where I was incredibly proud of what Martin did and his staff from a coaching perspective, and what the student athletes who were playing, what they did out there on the court. And I know that might sound like I'm, twisting the narrative a little bit, but to me, if you watch the games and you saw what the guys who went out there and competed and what they did, it's hard not to be proud of when you're playing 38 to 40 minutes a game and being able to go out and, our first Conference USA win was beating the team that ended up winning the championship in our league. And, our last Conference USA win was beating the team that came in second in the regular season. And there was a lot of moments in between there where I felt like we showed that we were capable of competing with the best teams in the league. And we just didn't do it at the beginning of the season the way that we needed to. And so that consistency and trying to figure that out, I think that it showed a lot in terms of, we changed our style pretty dramatically during the season. We slowed the game down, less possessions, tried to really limit the other team's ability to dictate the pace. And I think that translated really well for us, moving to a zone defense. It really showed that I think our ability to adapt to what we have. And now we have to think about, I won't jump too far ahead because I want to talk about the women too in a reflection, but we got to think about how we build a roster to do that from the get-go and not have to, really feel like we're just managing through with what we have, but really be prepared with, better depth and a better identity for us from the get-go to be able to have success across the board. But I'm proud of how those student athletes competed in those really hard moments, because if you watch the games, those last, besides the last game of the season, like the probably 8 or 9 before that, I was really proud of how we were competing. And on the women's side, it was a lot about consistency as well, right? We went through a really tough stretch to start the season, and then we had a stretch there where we were playing some of the best basketball in the league. And I think, when you win at Middle Tennessee State, who had a 39-game home conference win streak, I mean, that's not a fluke. That was because we were playing really well at that time. But it wasn't consistent throughout the year. And I think it was great that we went out to Alabama and got a win and beat Kennesaw, played great in that second half. And it really showed a moment that I felt like, okay, we can compete with the teams in this league. But we were off from the top of the league. And Louisiana Tech showed that in the next day. And again, the depth issues, I think, really showed up. And on their side of things, it was hard. We just didn't have enough ball handlers. And that made it really difficult. And so, again, as we think about what the future looks like, there's some things that we have to make some changes around to give Sarah Martin the tools they need to be successful, because I believe they can both win championships here.
I want to dive into all of that in the future. First, I want to spend a little bit more time on this past season for the men specifically. Before the season started, I even stated that on paper, this may be one of the most talented rosters in Martin Inglesby's tenure here. Of course, we never know how it gels on paper, but you think about strictly from a talent perspective and some of the players that were brought in, a lot looked exciting, especially to build off of a team that made that big run in the CAA tournament to end the season. The season I would say from even day one, just didn't go the way that I don't think anyone expected, you or Martin or the fans expected. Losses in non-conference play that shouldn't happen. Injuries or players not with the program. Finally finding themselves on the winning end of a streak in conference play. Finally getting that third game. Looked like they should have got a fourth game, but when Tyler went down in that second half, that changed the momentum. And of course that game as well. Against Western Kentucky, and then finishing last in the conference for the first time in 11 seasons. In your eyes, why did so much go wrong for men's basketball on and off the court this season?
Yeah. I mean, it was a combination of, I think we need to make some different decisions as we build out the roster for the future, and combined with we had some bad luck. And, I'm not the person that makes excuses. I mean, we own the things that we need to do better. And so I think that both those things can be true, though, right? I think we can say that there are some things that we needed to do differently and that we will as we move forward, but we had some really bad luck this year. And that's frustrating because the what if game of how we would have been is interesting at times, but it's not going to help us to win and be successful. But, Martin and I, as we talked throughout the year, I think the thing that became really clear that he did a great job with was, once he settled in with who was there and who was going to be available and who was going to be able to give the team what they needed, we found an identity. And we need to do that earlier on in the year. But our goal is going to always be preparing ourselves to be ready for conference play so that we can be in the best position to win the conference tournament. And, we didn't put ourselves in that position because we didn't make the tournament. But even if we did, it would have been a real tough slate to be able to get through it. And so, being able to end the year in that kind of top four, top half of the league is really important to give yourself the best chance of winning a tournament. And I think this year, even though we saw moments that he did a great job of finding what an identity could look like with the people that we had available, we've got to use the non-conference season next year to put ourselves in a position to be really ready for that. So when we get into those first games in conference at the end of December, that's when we're ready. And we weren't at this point this year. We really took a little while to get into that groove. And I think player availability was a big part of that made it really challenging. I also believe that, I think one of the things that we needed more of was college basketball experience on the floor. And it is what college basketball is today, is that we're going to have to likely go find that experience in the portal for ourselves. We'll have some of it back, but not a lot of it. And I think that was a place for us in roster construction this year that, even though we had a lot of talent, to your point, Bryce, that I think we were really excited about, the amount of time that people had played in college basketball going into it was pretty minimal. And I think that showed up at times where even our players that had great seasons, I think there were moments where that inexperience made it really difficult for us to win games in the beginning of the year, and it got better as the season went on. But we need to have that earlier on. And so, another example is like just how much we're going to have people here during the summer just to gel and get ready and be back together. So I think that, there's a couple things that we could have done differently. Not a couple, more than that. There was a good number of things that we could have done differently. But I would have really liked to see what the season was like with a full slate of people available. And that would have been really, I think it would have looked differently. Not to make excuses for it, but I think that's the reality.
Jordan, you've touched on some upsides and some positives to take away, from the men's basketball season. You've touched on Coach Inglesby's flexibility, really, and finding an identity for the group, or helping the group that was playing find that identity. And Coach changed some things up, like you said earlier. But how do you look at momentum from one season to the next? Because on the court and on the roster wise, that's one thing. There might not be much carryover, but is there momentum in terms of, obviously you've shown commitment to Coach Inglesby and largely to his staff, although we'll touch on any updates on staff maybe later on. But what is that sense of momentum that you might have? Where can we look for those biggest positives heading into the coming year?
Yeah, I mean, momentum is definitely interesting when the majority of the roster is going to look different. So I think the word instead of momentum is, I think what I'm looking at is, do we have the right infrastructure in place to be able to have success next season? Because, last year making a run at the end of the year was fun and it was exciting, but we didn't have the regular season that we wanted. And so, that momentum it wasn't like that carried us into this year, right? It really just gave us the ability to talk about, look, here's what's possible. And then we can go out and recruit some players. I think, what you're seeing us do now, if you're looking at, social as an example, is, we're not trying to gaslight into anyone to thinking that we had this amazing season. Like, we're trying to tell people, like, we believe in what we can do in the future, and we have building blocks and infrastructure here to be able to have success. So come to Delaware and be a part of that. And for some people, that means come to Delaware, be a part of it, and then we'll help you go do what you're going to do next. For some people, we want them to stay here because we believe in the Blue Hen experience, and we believe that people that want to come can be really successful and go on to do great things once they graduate. And so, I think that, for us, as we kind of evaluate the season and consider the things that, we're going to really need to prioritize here, is making sure that that identity is reflected in the roster makeup that we have. And I think, I'll give you another example of that. I think this year, even if we had some of the guys healthy, we probably needed more ball handlers again. And like Christian did a phenomenal job of playing 40 minutes a night and having the ball in his hand 90% of the game when we're on offense. But, we've got to be able to have different looks and a variety of options. And we didn't have enough people that could handle the ball for us to be able to do that. And I think that was a huge, that was just a roster gap for us. And so we've got to be able to think through, with experience, how are we going to have people there that can do that, have the ball in their hands, that have done it before. And I think that's going to be something that we're going to have to look at every position and consider, what is it that we really need, right? Where's your 3-and-D guys? What kind of big guys do you need that are going to be able to score? Which ones can really control the paint and make a difference to make it hard for other teams? I think this year defensively, we did a good job of adjusting, but we still didn't turn people over enough that we needed to. And we still struggle on the boards at times, which is going to happen when you're in a zone because it's just harder to match up. And Conference USA's teams, the athleticism, the size and speed, I think are different than what the CAA was. You look at the last game of the season with La Tech, and they had length and an ability to get offensive rebounds that was unlike teams in the CAA. And so that's a really bad matchup for us. And so we have to be better prepared to be able to match up against teams like that, because I think that's what you're going to find with a lot of Conference USA teams.
I actually have that in my notes later. The CAA, I think, was more guard driven. The Conference USA, I think I saw the physicality was a lot different. Everything within the perimeter was a whole different ballgame that the CAA showed. Something I wanted to touch on is the bad luck. We talked about the availability reports, and I think every team that Conference USA, especially road broadcasts, when when they met with the team and saw the roster and showed the bench, I think a lot of those fan bases learned for the first time what the Blue Hens were going through this year. Because if you look at the predictive metrics, you look at the win-loss record, I think maybe people painted the picture for themselves, but until that game started to understand how much that Delaware is going through off the court, I don't think they realized that. But there was a Blue Hens coaches show in January. Coach Ingleby stated that as we built the roster, some of the experienced guys we thought were going to help us are sitting on the bench out injured or choosing not to play. That choosing not to play was, I think, a big line, and I think it needs to be addressed to give the fans fully understanding on how that's handled within the athletic department. So I don't want to dive too deep on the who, because I know there's roster changes throughout the year, but I know this is a new era of NIL and definitely may be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. But how does the athletic department handle a situation if a member is choosing not to play, if they're deemed healthy?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of nuance to that. So I appreciate you bringing it up because it's an important discussion to have without talking about specifics with players, just because that's something that isn't right for us to do in a public setting in that way. And I want to also acknowledge the fact that there were guys that were hurt, and that is real. And so I think what I would say to that is, whenever you're having a roster of 15 people, the margins there are really small. So, when you have 105 people on a football team and guys get hurt, or, we had some people that wanted to redshirt in the football side of things that, didn't finish the season with us, and it's not as noticeable because there is a lot of depth there. But in basketball, you have 15 people, and that's not a lot of people. And so it shows up in a different way there. And so what I think is clear for us is that, we have to be able to think about when we are bringing people to Delaware or people are returning, that we've got to be really thoughtful about where they're coming from a health standpoint, and then what their motivations are, because, with NIL and revenue share now, there is a lot more at stake when you're trying to think about the decision to bring someone to your campus and or to have someone stay. And so for us, there's a number of things that we can do to mitigate some of those risks. But I don't think that there's anything that any school can do fully that is going to prevent there from being the situation where, you might feel like you're questioning someone's motivations at times. But I also believe when you look at the guys that went out there and played and competed, right, like you're going to be able to see that our coaching staff and our student athletes and our support staff, like they're going to pour everything into it. And that's why I think people were proud of what they actually saw. But it's really nuanced when it comes to every individual and how they look at that. And so that was frustrating. And I know that our student athletes that went out there and competed made us proud. And I wish that there were more availability throughout the year, because it would have made a difference for us at the end of the season.
Appreciate you, Jordan, tackling that head on, considering it was just looming. And we talked about off air a little bit, social media discourse and online discourse, when there's not a lot of concrete information to go on. And of course, people we're left to just draw conclusions, and it's times it even feels unfair to do. Like, it's hard to know when you see the long availability report and who might ever be back or who won't be back. So thanks for discussing that with us on the men's side. But Bryce, I know you were looking to turn it over to the women's side as well, kind of dive into the women's basketball season as well. We know Delaware was voted to finish 12th in the preseason poll in Conference USA. And Bryce and I have often said to each other, well, we know that's not the expectation internally in the women's program. And they did surpass that. Number 8 seed, a first-round win that we talked about a little bit earlier. But we also talked about those runs, peaks and valleys that the women's team had. There were injuries along the way, too, actually, that I think went under-discussed on the women's side, because the men's side stole a lot of the headlines with that number of injuries. But in your eyes, Jordan, what was the chief number of reasons for those runs and then those lulls that the women's team went through? I know Coach Jenkins even mentioned at one point, just on a radio interview, it didn't necessarily seem like the team handled success well at times. They got on that run and it faded late.
Yeah, I think so. Sarah and I were talking at one point during the season going into the conference tournament, and I said to her that, before they went on the run in the middle of the season, they were coming off a pretty challenging losing streak. And that's what happened going into the tournament. And then we went out and got a big win in that game. Right. And so I think what that shows is like when you have, again, there was a healthy amount of inexperience across the board with that team and just in terms of number of minutes played. And that at times showed up for us. And I think the turnovers was the biggest challenge this year. Was that it's really hard to create a rhythm offensively when you're turning the ball over as frequently as we were. And so, when we shot the ball well and we didn't turn the ball over, we were a really good team. And I think defensively, we did a pretty good job overall of turning the other team over and getting blocks and making havoc. And so that part felt like, for the most part, we could really compete defensively when the right energy and the right effort was there, which was most of the time. And Sarah did such a great job of coaching that up amongst the team. But I think on the offensive side, when we didn't take care of the ball is when it really showed up. And I believe that, when, Sarah she's been such a good job, even before she became the head coach. Like, she has such a great eye for talent and the ability to recruit student athletes that what I think that the portal has been, even in some ways, not necessarily with the attrition, but then trying to attract people to come, has really changed things because, some of the student athletes that we attracted here before NIL was a thing, she did such a good job of being able to get people that were going to get higher looks and show them how special Delaware was. And so now it's been a little bit more challenging to do that. And so, we're going to have to continue to invest into that program, which both the men's and the women's programs are going to be at the top end of Conference USA in terms of what we're invested into them. I think that they're going to be able to then go out and get some pretty talented student athletes. And that's going to be an important piece for her to be able to limit some of those challenges on the turnover side of things. And I think that'll make a big difference. But there was a lot of moments this year where you could see when the streak was good, we were tough and we were a dangerous team. And we were just a bit behind those top teams in the league. I was really surprised Louisiana Tech didn't win it. And, credit to Missouri State for how they, finished the season. But that Louisiana Tech team was very good. And I think that they, there was a reason that coming into our game, I think they had won maybe 15 games in a row. And so, that's a tough matchup. But the fact that we beat Kennesaw and showed our ability to, with the kind of that middle of the pack, I think we feel like this is a team and a program that there is no reason that we can't be at that top end in a consistent way. Again, if we have the right roster makeup.
We talked about that middle of the conference slate where they won that game at Middle Tennessee. They had that second half fight against FIU, who was another team that made a good run.
Yeah.
That Liberty home game to win a game. There was plenty of times where it showed 3 of the top 5 seeds in the conference Delaware won against in the season. We talked about the men's side, where Conference USA maybe deferred a little bit from CAA, and the women's side, was there differences that really stood out, or maybe the losing side really showed out versus the winning side? Because there was one point where, when you said it was all clicking, we were talking about maybe them avoiding the entire first round completely at that point.
Yeah, I think we were like right at 4th place right before we went on a bit of a losing streak, or like tied for 4th. We were in that mix. And I think the difference, it's a good question about the difference between the CAA and Conference USA. I think the biggest difference is that the parity in Conference USA was just stronger across the board. In the CAA, it always felt like there was just so many teams as well at the end of our time there, that the bottom of the CAA was weaker than the bottom of Conference USA. And so when you get into those slides and you can lose against anybody is when it kind of showed up. And I think this year in particular, both on the men's and women's side, if I look at some of those games against UTEP or New Mexico State, like teams that were not as strong, but that we struggled with, the bottom end of the CAA, I feel like we would have been able to manage in a different way. And I know, when Sarah went out to UTEP, like the elevation was pretty different. And so there were some things there that we had to learn from that I think was was important for us. And some of the travel was a challenge, but it's a travel challenge for people coming here. And so we're not using that as an excuse. I think we definitely feel like our home ability to win at home, we've got to continue to really improve. And, we need to continue to create a better environment and a more exciting environment for fans. And we did a lot this year to work towards that. It's hard when the team isn't winning as much, but I think we can do a lot more as an athletic department to create an environment that's going to give people a much tougher time when they come to the Bob. And so I think that will make a big difference for us moving forward too, because this year it felt like at times that we even played better on the road than we did at home. And that's not where we want to be. I love when we win games on the road, but we got to defend our home court, and we got to make it a hard place to play.
Jordan, we've discussed now the men's and women's sides. It's been great doing it kind of bit by bit and giving each side individual love. But on the whole, kind of marrying it together, which we can do on this subject with General Manager Jason Gandhi, who serves as General Manager for both programs. By Bryce's count and my count, this will be Jason's first full offseason, if we recall correctly, in terms of being a part of the whole discussion, end of season, and then into the new construction of a roster for the coming year. And the word on ESPN reporting had been that it looks like Jason will have a bigger role than he had before, although timing-wise with the calendar, we would expect that he would on this time around. Can you describe for us, and we got to hear from him a little bit on Blue Hens Radio with Scott Klatskin earlier in the year, but from your point of view, overseeing everything in this respect from the AD chair, kind of what role does Jason have during the season, and then even more importantly now after the season, as far as looking at two rosters at once and trying to help each coaching staff with their needs?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this is an investment that we feel like for both football, men's and women's basketball, that is so critical to what college athletics is today. And we have to be able to do two things with our GM positions. We have to be able to let our coaches coach, and that allows a GM to have conversations with student athletes or their representatives throughout the year. And then the other piece that's so important is, how do you take, we still need our coaches to know what they want their identity to be on the court, what kind of team they want to have, the style they want to play, and the types of players they want to have fit that system. But then in order to then go get those student athletes or retain those student athletes to do it, we need Jason's ability to be able to then put the valuation to the evaluation, right? So the valuation component of it, so that we're spending our dollars wisely and that we're utilizing them in a way where we feel like our return there is going to be the best thing possible, is what we really need that position to do. And I think that's one of the things where last year, Jason didn't get to do really any of that because he came in during the portal being open. The second that the portal opens up, this year the portal opens up later than it did last year. Last year, the portal opened up, it was either like right after we lost to UNC Wilmington, or it might have even been right before. It was in that mix. It was during the NCAA tournament. So it was right after the season had ended for us. And this year, obviously, they moved it to being after the NCAA tournament concludes, which is great. I wish they could do something similar to football, but it doesn't line up with the academic calendar in the same way. But on the basketball side of things, that is really important for us, because once our season's ended, really before that, but once our season's ended is when now we can have all the player discussions that we need to have. And, Jason's been evaluating, the portals are open for D2, for JUCO, for D3, like all those have been open already. And so we've been able to spend a lot of time evaluating those prospects, and that's important for us, so that our coach during the season is coaching and not having to have all those individual conversations. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing that is, different and that we're really focused on for this year, is making sure that our kind of roster, the valuation that goes to our roster is lining up with the evaluation of prospects.
I think I kind of want to tie this into the retention standpoint a little bit for basketball. Football had a great, I'd say, offseason and retention. Selling fans on players on the basketball side. If you talked about earlier, if maybe Delaware is a stop in the road for somebody to get back up, from the fan standpoint, I understand if that's a little bit challenging. You buy into this player for a year and then they're off somewhere else the year after. And I kind of view Delaware's construction, and someone actually shared this to me, of thinking about it as like a fantasy football auction draft of a sense. If you're going to bring a player back, you have to make sure that it doesn't affect the rest of your roster lining up. Is that something that it's probably it's probably not the best example, but I think about it that standpoint and bringing players back and on both the men's and women's basketball side, and of course football and any other program.
Yeah, I think so the way I would describe it is that, when we think about our budget for the year for our programs when it comes to NIL and revenue share, we're doing two things at once. We're creating pools that we know that we have based on all the revenue streams we have available to us to put us in a position to be competitive at the top end of Conference USA is the first marker. We also have to look at who we really recruit against. And so it's interesting for us because that means we have to be competitive with that mid-Atlantic kind of, section of schools. And at times that number is higher than what Conference USA benchmarks are. And so we've got to have both of those in mind as we're going through any of these kind of roster retention conversations. And then what we're going to look at when it comes to the portal. I think the thing for us that is, when we look at like how we would value someone, especially when we coming back, we also do it based upon the success that we had the previous year, right? And so in football, I think what was clear was like we feel like we have a core there that investing into them and making sure that we're going to be able to have really high retention gives us an incredible chance of having success and building off of what we did last year. The truth is that this year in both the men's and women's sides, we didn't have the success we wanted to. So it doesn't mean that we still don't try to retain talented student athletes. That's really important. But it is a different conversation because I don't think that the roster makeups were exactly what we needed to do to be winning Conference USA championships. And so we've got to balance that where, it's not a surprise. Like most people that are going to think about coming back are going to want more. And so then you really have to consider, is that worth it compared to what you're trying to build the entire roster around? And I think that's what we have to challenge ourselves with. And so retention is going to be a priority for us because I believe that, and you've heard me say this so many different times in different ways, like we have great people here. And if we can retain great people, it's going to give us a better chance to be successful. But we also need to know that the valuation is the right one as we're kind of going through all that. And so it is what we're constantly looking at. We have a lot of different metrics and data that we're using now. We have a entire business intelligence team that looks at data analytics in a way that is supporting what Martin and Sarah and Jason are looking at. And that's looking at both our current student athletes and what's going to be in the portal. I think that's an area for us that we can really differentiate ourselves with now with some of the use of AI and different technologies and software and things that we're building ourselves that are specific to Delaware. We can start to look at that in a way that we believe can give us a valuation that might look differently than other schools. We also have to know what the market is out there. And so both those things have to kind of line up in a way where we feel like it's going to give us the right chance to be able to build a roster to win championships.
Dan, before you jump in with your next one, I wanted to ask, when you talk about the market, how do you understand and understand what the market's going to be for a second? Because that's what pops out to me there. It's hard.
There's two ways to look at the market. There's a fair amount of GMs across the country that are willing to share information with each other that is private. None of the public numbers are things to trust. None of them. And there's a reason for that. Like agents are going to inflate numbers because they want schools to then meet their numbers. And so that's what happens. And so, I've seen numbers thrown out there that are incorrect for ones that when I know they're wrong because there are players, then it just shows that it's coming from a place of, people are trying to utilize this moment to try to make money. And so we are going to rely on the conversations that we know that we can have. And there are coaches and GMs that are open about this. And I think we are going to always have some level of skepticism with a public number that's out there and know that it's going to be inflated for certain reasons. But the challenge then, this is kind of the second part, is whatever the student athlete thinks is also part of the market. And so they might think they're worthy of something because of what's being put out there publicly. And then we have to manage that in a way where we feel like, are they looking at this in the way that is fair and accurate, or is this something that's inflated that we have to give them a sense of, here's how we see it. And it's not always about money. And that's the thing that's hard about this is like, we are putting resources into this. I believe that we can have a lot of success in men's and women's basketball because of the infrastructure that we have. But we also provide a really great experience here, and that counts for something. And so we aren't going to lowball people because of that experience, but we're also not going to overpay at times when we can say, yeah, but you're still coming to the University of Delaware and you have access to a great education and the Whitney Athletic Center and great support staff. And that matters. And I'm not going to shy away from that. I don't think that that's cliche. I think that that's real because we hear it back from our student athletes on the other side of things. I mean, John Camden is still out there telling everyone to go to Delaware because he loved it here. And as a student athlete that went to 4 different schools, and he's talking about, this was a great
high-level
place
schools on that list too.
That's right. That's exactly right. And, he still left, but I think it does speak to the fact that there is a way for us to understand the market enough to be able to say, okay, here's how we can be successful within that, even though some of the numbers that are real are shocking that that's what schools would be paying. And until there is any more, right now the third party piece makes it so that the Power 4, or I guess, include the Big East in that, and maybe even the A10, like those 6 conferences, they're doing a fair amount of their NIL that is not coming through the institution. And the schools that really have to do that are the ones that also have football, right? The Big East and the A10 can do it in a way where they're not anywhere near the cap still, but the other schools have to do it outside. And those regulations through the College Sports Commission are still pretty murky at best.
Jordan, these are tough conversations to have at times, understanding the business aspects of it and getting more aware of the realities of Division I right now after the House settlement. And so kind of along those lines, another tough kind of question to ask or conversation to have is, based on reporting about the men's basketball staff, should we expect staff changes to Coach Inglesby's staff? And if so, would there be clarity on that during this coming portal window? And then also on the women's basketball side too, just understanding what to expect, not expecting you might have every detail yet, but just those kind of things, what to expect from who will be on the staff on each team.
Yeah, I mean, there will be some personnel changes on both staffs. I won't speak to them specifically, but that is the case. I'll talk about my style from a leadership standpoint, because I think that probably gives you the best answer, which is, I'm not one to dictate that this is what you're going to do. That's not who I am. I am going to say that the season was not meeting expectations, and so we need to make changes. Those changes are not exclusive to staff. Those are about the program in general. And in this moment, my decision was, I felt like, look, I believe in what both Martin and Sarah can do. I've seen them be able to coach. I've seen them be able to build programs. I believe in them both, and I want them to be successful here, and they want to be successful here, and that's a good starting point. And so then the next conversation is, well, what do we need to do to make sure that next year is different and that we can have more success? Because the University of Delaware is a place that we can win in men's and women's basketball. And so then we have a really wide-ranging conversation that is over the course of months throughout the season. It's always interesting. I don't feel like there's a lot when I'm talking with them or any of our coaches during the season. It's not my job to tell them how to coach basketball, right? I mean, I know enough about it that we can have in-depth conversations about every sport, but they've forgotten more about basketball in the last week than I will ever know, because that's their livelihood every single day. And so my job is to talk about what they're doing in terms of what they're building and their vision and the identity they want to have, and how do we help get them there. And so when we do that, it usually goes pretty quickly into the future years, because I can't do anything when they have limited availability or the season is where it is. I wasn't going to talk to Martin and all of a sudden we were going to go on this 20-game winning streak all of a sudden, because that's not how it works, right? It works in terms of saying, what's the challenges you're having right now? What do we need to do to help support you? And what are the things that we need to change moving forward so that next year looks different than this? Because that's what he wants too. And so when we have those conversations, staff is certainly a big part of that because people are really important. Roster is a huge part of that, and that's really important. Resources are a big part of it. How we're going to think about the off season and everything that we're going to do to be ready, and strength and conditioning and athletic training and sports medicine and all that is a big part of it. And so we have to then look at it and say, what are the things that you're going to change, that you're making the decision on, that are going to give us success for next year? And it's their decision at that point to make those changes that they feel like are going to be right for the program. And certainly I'm pretty heavily involved, and Maddie White, who's our sport administrator for those two programs, is heavily involved, and Jason's involved when it comes to the roster side of things. But I need our head coaches to make the decisions and believe in what they're doing, because if I'm just sitting there telling them that these are the decisions that you're going to make, then the buy-in isn't going to be there. And frankly, I think that would be, pretty irresponsible of me to say exactly, I know what's best for you in every single moment. I know what we need to get to. I know where we need to be. And I can't be more excited about what that could look like, but they got to make a decision at the end of the day.
Thinking about the roster construction, and there was a new rule recently. I know the similar with football. I think maybe you've been questioning about the football side, but the NCAA switched up the 13 scholarship and multiple walk-on rule to a 15-player roster limit. Especially, I know both sides had injuries this year, but especially the men's side, when you're thinking at the end of the year, you only have 6 players dressed at the end of the day. Is that something that might shift? So I know in the past years, especially the men's, have stuck with the 13 scholarships. I know Title IX adds another thing to it. I know it's not a perfect one-for-one change for Delaware, especially, but I know both programs could rise together. Is that something that Delaware's going to switch on, or maybe stick with the model that that both programs have stuck with before?
Yeah, I think the question should always be, if you have a resource, how do you want to best use it? And so if you have $60,000, do you want to use it in a 14 scholarship, or do you want to use it into your roster in a different way in terms of NIL revenue share? And so at the moment, I believe our best use of those resources is going to be in terms of NIL and revenue share than it would be into the 14 to 15 scholarship. And that's a conversation, though, that is not black and white. I mean, there's certainly this year, you're right. Like, would it have been great to have 2 more scholarship student athletes there? Sure. I think Brandon and Alex do a ton for us that they do throughout the year, and they're in every practice and fighting their tail off. And I'm proud of those guys, and that's awesome. But yeah, there would have been moments that it would have been great to have, a couple more healthy bodies throughout the year. I think what we are focused on is, when you think about all the resources and all the different components of a program, is where do you want to prioritize those? And I think in this moment, prioritizing those into the 13 scholarship players and investing in that way is the way to go. But that is a conversation for sure, and it's something that we think about. So I don't mean to say that it's not an option for us, but I think that investing it into those top 13 is probably the place that we feel like is going to give us the best bang for our buck.
Jordan,
and that's different. That could be different for different sports. Sorry, Dan. That could be a little different for different sports. Like every sport's so different. We're like if you think about a men's, women's lacrosse, or a softball and a baseball, like those sports, maybe it is better to invest into more scholarships than it would be in terms of revenue share. So I just want to throw that out there, because basketball is interesting because it's just so few spots that are not scholarshiped. But yeah, sorry to cut you off there.
No, Jordan, I apologize. I jumped a snap there. I know you had an extra thought there now, and I'm glad you were able to share with us. It probably comes no surprise to you that Bryce and I mentioned football along the way, and we just made it as a comparison point with the retaining of various football starters and looking into the coming year for football. I think one of the vibes that it seems like getting the Delaware fan base, and it's hard not to contrast the football returns and the starting men's basketball returns, and the reactions might be, and I think we discussed this off air, kind of like, well, here's the black and white conclusion, which is clearly this school, whether it's Delaware or put any school name on it, cares about or prioritizes football at not the exclusion of, but maybe the detriment of basketball. Just in this era, there's only so many rev share budgets to go around. And so sometimes that could be the reaction or the impression. How much do you see the G6 football versus the East Coast mid-major men's basketball kind of markets differ as far as Delaware's placement in that? Because I know that you're certainly invested in, you said, is success in men's basketball and women's basketball. And I know generally the vibe has been from you, it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive, of course. But I think just in terms of the offseason, a lot of names back for football and then not seeing the same returns for men's basketball. So there can be concerns of there are fans in the Delaware fan base who are basketball first. And their concern might be now it's FBS football. There's been a lot of investment in football, which is certainly we like to see. But then there are question marks about the hoop side. If you kind of understand maybe that word salad question on my end in terms of how do you react to that in terms of people trying to make sense of the differences in returnees?
Yeah, we can win at both. That's what I would say. I mean, there is no reduction in our ability to win in basketball because of our investments in the football at all. Now, I think it's a really fair question to ask in terms of how it all works when you do have, I don't even want to call it limited resources, but we don't have unlimited resources, right? Like we have to make decisions and prioritize on a daily basis. But those decisions, we are resourced in a way that I believe that we can win in these sports. No doubt in my mind. And I don't think this is a resource issue. I don't. It doesn't mean we don't need more. We absolutely need more. We need people to continue to invest in our program. We really need more people to come to our games, and we got to do our part on that. But that is something that for anyone listening out there that feels like they want to make a difference, we need people to buy tickets and we need people to show up and we need people to be loud. That's the easiest thing that people can do is be present and visible and help us win in that way. We need investment in terms of our ability to grow the dollars to support these programs, but our investments into football are not preventing our basketball programs from winning. I really believe that. And I think our coaches would say the same thing. They don't feel like they're not getting what they need because of our investments into football. Now, I do believe that the Big East and the A-10 have a pretty big advantage when it comes to their ability to build rosters because I think that there is the ability for how the fans support the programs is going to look a little different. And so I do think that is maybe an advantage that they have in some respect. But again, at Delaware, it doesn't mean that it's taking away from our ability to be successful. And I think it's one of the things that is the best part of our move to Conference USA. And we've talked about this before. The CAA is a really tough league from a basketball perspective when you've got UNC Wilmington and Charleston and Hofstra and Northeastern and Drexel, and they don't have football. And that's a pretty interesting dynamic when half the teams that are at that top end don't have football and they're investing that into basketball in that way. But I believe we put ourselves in a position where, our revenue is one that is continuing to grow at a good clip, that as long as we continue to bring in investors in different ways, and now that there's new ways to do that, I'm sure there are some people that are not going to love it when we do jersey patches, and I understand that, but that's a revenue stream that didn't exist before, that if that helps us be able to have, retain great student athletes or attract new ones here, then that's the right thing for Delaware. And we're going to align it with companies that we believe are the right ones for us. But whether it's, naming naming Delaware Stadium or it's putting on a jersey patch, like those are things that we need to do to be able to then have resources to continue to invest in our programs, because our donors have been fantastic. They have stepped up so much to help us in this new era. They're going to need to continue to do that. But there is a point at which we've got to find other streams to be able to help us. And so both needs to happen. But I think it's unfair to say that football is preventing our basketball programs from being successful. I don't think that's the case from our perspective at all.
I kind of want to close a chapter on this basketball season because I know internally you guys are already on to next year. So thinking about next year, we talked about what success looks like for all programs in the athletic department, competing for conference championships, good student athlete graduation rate. But what does success look like for the basketball programs next season? And in, I guess, a year of learning in Conference USA and outputting it into lessons learned in the second year?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer it simply in one way and then more complicated in the next. The simple way is like we've got to be at the top half of the league so we can compete for a conference championship at the end of the season. That's a simple way of saying it. And, probably even more than top half, right? It's probably like in that top four gives you the best chance of success. So that's a simple way of looking at it. And like anything, the more complicated way, which I think this year is an example of, is that I'm not pretending that this year is successful, but I also think that there's moments in which you've got to look at what is our team and coaching staff and program accomplishing with what they have available in that moment? And I as crazy as it sounds, like I'm proud of how the teams competed this year. I'm not okay with the results, but I'm proud of how they competed at the end of the day. And I think when I look at next year, I want to remain proud of how we're competing. Like we have to be able to keep doing that and showing up and putting the effort and showing that we can, be successful winning games at home and in our league. And that's going to be really important. And I do think that, deep postseason runs are the real testament of success. It's hard in leagues that are 1 or 2 bid leagues because, you can have a great season and not win a championship and still feel really good about the year. And that's how, it hasn't been the case in our basketball programs recently where we've had those great regular seasons. But I think about that with softball the last few years. Like I'm not any less proud of what our softball program has done when we've won all these regular season championships and we haven't won at the end. It's been frustrating. And, Coach Steele, even more so than me, wishes that, the end of the season would look a little different. But you can see the building blocks in place, right? And the things that are giving us success. And so I think that's what we need as we look at our basketball programs is to be in a position to say, that the conference regular season is one that we're at the top end of that at the end of the year. And that puts us in a position to be successful come tournament time, because I don't think there's any limitation on what we can accomplish. I'm so excited about what, the potential is. And, I know that there's plenty of people that this year in particular, that the last 2 seasons in the men's side of things, there's been less mid-majors that have won in the NCAA tournament. But if you're watching the games, like they're not that they're uncompetitive. Like Kennesaw State gave Gonzaga a heck of a game.
Especially this year. This year they were tight. Like in the last 5 minutes, it's like it was anyone's game.
That's right. And so, I believe that if you can get into it, and I think we're going to get a better seed if we can win the league in Conference USA than we're going to in the CAA for the most part. It obviously depends a little bit on which team wins it at the end of the season. But if Liberty would have won the league this year, they would have been a higher seed than Kennesaw ended up as, but they were tough out. I mean, that game against Gonzaga was great. And I believe, that our ability to win a Conference USA title and then see what happens in the tournament, I don't have any reason to think that that's not something that we should be expecting out of ourselves. And so that's where we are. That's what we want to do. And that's what we're looking towards. And we got a lot to work on to get there, but I believe that we can.
And basketball rewards that a little bit more. If softball had an NIT tournament, Delaware would have been represented in that well. And Conference USA compared to CAA has had multiple representatives in the past years in both the men's and women's. So at least there's postseason output if you have a great regular season in Conference USA. So that's definitely the goal. But Dan, I didn't want to cut you off on what you're about to ask. I know we want to.
Yeah. As far as just looking at on the hardwood and continuing to spin it forward for the near term, just it's hard to guarantee or assure anybody of these are the goals we're for sure going to meet as a baseline in the transfer window. Because, of course, in the portal, everything's so fluid. There's every single school, especially in mid-majors in the country, is on the receiving end or is trying to be on the receiving end. So I know it's difficult to quantify for you, Jordan, and for anybody else, let alone on staff. But are there particular goals, or is it going to be hard to balance? You mentioned seeking more proven collegiate playing experience. That comes at a cost a lot of times in this era in the portal, but then also looking for greater depth, which would be a bit of a trade-off too, because I would think just having greater volume of players coming in, of course, Jason and everybody else figuring out how to allocate rev share, things like that. Do you see those as being 2 primary goals, getting a few more options with proven collegiate playing experience, and then also trying to round out the depth a little bit? I mean, it feels like you almost have to choose more one than the other, but I could be wrong on that. Are those kind of things that you're thinking about for goals for this portal cycle?
Yeah, I think you can get both. I think you can get proven players, maybe from different levels, right? But guys that have experience while also making sure that you're going to have depth across the board. I actually think they kind of complement one another because, just think of having if we have 3 point guards next year as an example, right? And you've got at least one of them that has played a lot of college basketball. That person doesn't have to be the starter. They could still be able to come in and make a difference, but limit the ability for, the starter to have to be in there for 40 minutes. There's a lot of different ways that I think we can look at how we're going to do our roster evaluations. But the things that are at a premium for us on I think both sides, for both men and women, but I'll speak to the men first, is ball handlers and shooters are going to be really important. And we need more presence from a defensive standpoint down low. And so if we're going to get those things and figure out how to do them, you could find them in a variety of different ways. But I think we got to look at some of them coming from D2 JUCO levels as a part of that, because they're going to have some meaningful experience. They can also come from low major programs, right? But I think it's unrealistic to think that we're going to get Power 4 guys that have a lot of experience to come to the University of Delaware. But we've had a lot of success with Power 4 guys that didn't have a lot of experience. And so that's great to have, with the complement of people that have also played a lot of meaningful college basketball. That's how I think it's the balance a little bit. And there are schools that have done it and been successful in all the different ways, where their star players are guys that have come from the D2 level and done really well. And if you're watching Iowa right now, you're like, how are they doing it? And that's impressive, right? That they found these guys that have come from all these different levels. But we've shown that, some of our best years, we've had guys that have come from different areas that, it wasn't that long ago that, Nate Darling and Justin Mutz had to sit out a year to come play at the University of Delaware. And that they were coming from other, mid-major programs. And so
two good ones too, UAB
right.
and High Point. Yeah,
that's right. So, I think it just shows there's a lot of different ways to do it, but having experience is really important for us, and having depth. And those two things we've got to then figure out how to get as we think about this year. And then there's a lot of variations to how we build that out.
Right. There's probably, we could go all day. There's definitely topics I'm sure that fans wanted us to dive further on, but I just want to give you one last opportunity. One chapter closed, another chapter soon to be open after the NCAA tournament ends. One last opportunity to address the fans as it closes and we get into 2026, 2027.
Yeah, well, thanks. And again, I want to thank, the two of you guys, or three of you guys too, with Brody as well, just in terms of, I think what you guys do in covering the Blue Hens are awesome. It's terrific to have people talking about us. As I hope you'll find for me, is I will talk about us all day long, and anything that I can share, I will, because it's important for people to hear directly from what our strategy is and how we're trying to go about it. And, I believe that we can be successful in men's, women's basketball, and that we can win championships. And I think if there's anything that you take away from what you heard today, is that, we aren't happy with what played out last season. We want to be better than that. I'm still proud of what our student athletes did under the circumstances and how our coaches navigated everything that they had to. And so I can be proud, but also expect more. And I hope that's what our fans feel, is that they should expect more, and we want to win. We need our fans to keep showing up. We need more people to come to games. We got to give them a reason to do that. And I think that, one other tidbit that I'll throw out there is the schedule as we think about our home games is going to be an interesting one for us, because I know people don't like the non-D1 games, but we're going to have to play a couple of them as we just think about what the cycle is going to look like and the schedule to build momentum at certain times of the year. We also need to bring some exciting teams in addition to that to campus. We got to win all those games, and we got to make sure that we put ourselves in a position where when we get into conference season, we're ready right away. And that I know we can do if we have the right fans behind it, we build the right roster out, and I'm excited for it. I mean, I wish that we could build the roster right now and go play a game and begin the season again, because I believe that we can be really successful, both, men's and women's. And I'm excited for what that'll look like. And talk is cheap to some degree, so I'm not going to make a bunch of empty promises, but we are going to make some changes that are going to put us in a position where I believe is going to give us success. And we need our fans to be right there with us, because we can't do it without them. So thanks to everyone listening that's going to help be a part of that in some way. And we're excited for what's to come.
Jordan, thanks so much for
Bryce,
joining us. And I know,
Bryce, right. Yeah, you're not going to like this from me, Bryce. If I can go, Coach Carty, hurry up offense while we get Jordan under the 1 hour mark still. Quick follow. I know you're wrapping up, Bryce. So you touched on this, Jordan, so I'm just going to broach it briefly and then see if you don't want to expand any further, that's okay. But you mentioned with jersey patches, with the possibility of commercial jersey patches, is that a timeline that you'd like to see implemented for the coming up academic year only in football, or would it be across sports? Are those things you guys are still discussing? You want to make sure you have kind of options available.
Yeah, we want to have it for the right partners and the right companies for whatever sports that they want to invest into, and the ones that are the most visible, the ones that I think companies are going to be most interested in. And so yeah, we would love to have that done and ready for next season. And I am I grew up watching college sports and playing college sports, and that wasn't the case. And so I understand that there is going to be some people that are not going to love that. And my hope is that people understand that it's a way for us to invest into our programs to help us be successful. And I think we can find some great companies that I believe are going to be the right partners for us too, especially if we can find some ones that are local Delaware, 302 companies that resonate with people and align with our values. It's the right thing for us to do. So yeah, I think that it is the plan is to have that for the upcoming seasons. And if people don't like it, they can talk to me about it, and I'll tell them exactly why, because I believe in it as a way to find revenue for our programs.
Dan, I'm not too mad at you. I appreciate it. But
sometimes you got to take an X play shot, especially late in the game. I just got to get that kind of deep pass in there. So appreciate Jordan playing ball on that.
Yeah, Jordan, I appreciate you just taking the time with us and talking about it. Because I think all three of us would agree. We would rather talk about how great of a season it was and how much it was fun to win conference championships and how we're going to do it again next year. So I appreciate you sitting down with us and answering some tough questions, and excited to see how the athletic department, specifically the basketball programs, take this offseason into stride and to make a stronger year or two in Conference USA. So I appreciate you sitting down with us. Maybe we'll have to do this after the spring season, because we met before the bowl game, and maybe we'll have to go 3 for 3 on the windows there. So Jordan, thanks so much for joining us here, and let the portal season begin.
Yeah, thanks guys. Go Hens. Appreciate it.